Welcome back to History Recapped, the channel where we dive deep into the epic stories that shaped our world. Today we journey into the heart of Mesoamerica to uncover the dramatic rise and tragic fall of one of history's most powerful civilizations, the Aztec Empire. From the mythic origins of the Mexica people to the grandeur of Tenochtitlan, and from legendary emperors to the Spanish conquest that changed the world forever, this is the complete story of the Aztecs, the world before the Mexica. The story of the Aztec Empire does not begin with the Aztecs themselves. To understand how a wandering people of nomads rose to build one of the greatest cities in the world, we first need to step back and explore the deep history of the Valley of Mexico, the land that shaped them. Long before the Aztecs arrived, this highland basin had been the cradle of great civilizations. Towering volcanoes, fertile soils and lakes stretching across the valley made it an ideal heartland for human settlement. Yet it was also a land of constant flux. Empires rose, flourished and fell, leaving ruins and legends for the Aztecs to inherit. Teotihuacan, the city of the gods. The first great power to dominate the valley was Teotihuacan, a city so vast and awe-inspiring that the later Aztecs called it the place where the gods were born. At its height, between the 2nd and 6th centuries CE, Teotihuacan was home to more than 150,000 people, making it one of the largest cities in the world at the time. Here stood the colossal Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon, connected by the Grand Avenue of the Dead. Murals depicted jaguars, serpents and divine warriors. Trade routes extended across Mesoamerica. Obsidian blades from Teotihuacan were prized in every market. But Teotihuacan eventually collapsed, sometime around the 7th or 8th century. Whether from internal revolt, climate stress or invasion, its downfall left the valley fragmented. For centuries, smaller city-states and migrating peoples competed for dominance, each claiming fragments of the legacy of Teotihuacan. The Toltecs, masters of Tula. Centuries later, another power rose, the Toltecs, centered at the city of Tula. Flourishing between the 10th and 12th centuries, they were remembered as skilled warriors, builders and artisans. Towering stone statues of Toltec warriors still stand at Tula, guardians of a lost age. The Aztecs, arriving later, would look to the Toltecs as their cultural ancestors. They claimed descent from Toltec kings, adopting their gods, rituals and even their political ideals. To the Aztecs, the Toltecs represented the height of civilization, a model they would strive to surpass. Yet the Toltec Empire too fell. Drought, famine and waves of migration broke Tula apart. By the 13th century, the Valley of Mexico was once again divided among rival city-states, each vying for supremacy. The Nahua migrations. Into this fragmented world came waves of migrants, Nahua-speaking peoples from the north, often remembered in legend as Chichimeca or barbarian nomads. Among them were the Mexica, the people who would later be known as the Aztecs. When the Mexica first entered the valley in the 13th century, they were poor, hungry, and despised by the more established city-states. They were mercenaries, hired swords for stronger powers, often pushed onto the margins of society. Legends describe them as wearing animal skins and living in reed huts, a far cry from the monumental empire they would one day command. But what set the Mexica apart was their resilience, their adaptability, and above all, their religious vision. According to their mythology, the god Huitzilopochtli, the god of the sun and war, had guided them on a long migration from the mythical northern land of Aztlan. They were destined, he promised, to find a place where an eagle perched on a cactus, devouring a snake. There, they would build their city. This prophecy would drive the Mexica forward, sustaining them through centuries of hardship. For now, however, they remained outsiders, wandering the valley, searching for their destiny, from outcasts to founders of a city. When the Mexica first arrived in the Valley of Mexico in the late 13th century, they were outcasts among outcasts. Other Nahua-speaking peoples, like the Tepanecs and the Acolhua, had already established themselves in fortified cities with farmland, canals and trade networks. The Mexica, by contrast, were a wandering people with little wealth, no great city, and no prestigious lineage to boast of. They survived as mercenaries and raiders, offering their skill in war to stronger city-states in exchange for food and shelter. Yet even as they served others, they were scorned and distrusted. Legends tell us that their arrival was met with suspicion and sometimes violence. According to one tradition, the Mexica were once given land near Chapultepec, only to be driven out by a coalition of rival states. In these early years, the Mexica learned the art of survival, never relying too heavily on any ally, moving when necessary, and always listening to the voice of their god, Huitzilopochtli, who guided them onward, the founding of Tenochtitlan. The turning point came with a vision. The Mexica, still searching for their promised home, settled briefly on islands in the middle of Lake Texcoco. There, according to tradition, they saw it, an eagle perched on a cactus devouring a serpent. This, they believed, was the sign foretold by Huitzilopochtli. In 1325 CE, they began to build Tenochtitlan, a settlement on swampy islands in the lake. It was a difficult place to live. The ground was marshy, the resources scarce. But the very disadvantages of their location would become strengths. The surrounding waters offered protection from attack, while the Mexica developed ingenious methods of agriculture, constructing chinampas, floating gardens built from mud and reeds, which allowed them to grow food in abundance. What began as a precarious settlement of reed huts would grow into one of the greatest cities the world had ever seen. The early struggles. Even after founding Tenochtitlan, the Mexica were not yet masters of their destiny. They lived under the shadow of stronger powers, particularly the Aztec Empire based at Azcapotzalco. For decades, the Mexica served the Tepanecs as vassals and warriors, providing military support in exchange for security. This period was humbling, but also transformative. The Mexica honed their reputation as fearsome fighters, earning wealth and prestige through service. They also absorbed the political lessons of their neighbors, studying how tribute systems were organized, how alliances were built, and how rulers projected authority. Step by step, they were preparing themselves for the leap from subject people to rising power, religion and identity. Central to the Mexica's endurance was their religious identity. Unlike other city-states who worshipped a pantheon with a balance of deities, the Mexica placed Huitzilopochtli, god of the sun and war, at the very center of their belief system. They believed that the sun itself depended on their sacrifices to rise each morning. This gave their struggles a cosmic significance. Every battle, every hardship was part of a divine mission. Their mythology of migration, suffering, and divine destiny set them apart. They were not merely another city-state in the valley, they were a chosen people, destined for greatness. This conviction fueled their determination to transform their precarious island settlement into an empire. First steps toward power. By the late 14th century, the Mexica had grown in strength and ambition. They began to assert their independence from Azcapotzalco, electing their first Tlatoani, or ruler, in 1375 CE Acamapichtli. He was chosen not only for his leadership, but also for his noble lineage, as he was descended from the prestigious Toltecs. This clever choice gave the Mexica a veneer of legitimacy in the eyes of their rivals. Under Acamapichtli, Tenochtitlan began to flourish. Canals were dug, causeways were built to connect the island to the mainland, and temples rose in honor of the gods. The Mexica were no longer merely mercenaries. They were becoming a city-state in their own right, breaking chains and forging empires. By the early 15th century, the Mexica of Tenochtitlan had grown in confidence and ambition. Their city was flourishing, canals crisscrossed the island, causeways stretched across Lake Texcoco, and marketplaces bustled with activity. But for all their progress, the Mexica remained subordinate to their overlords, the Tepanecs of Azcapotzalco. The Tepanecs had long dominated the Valley of Mexico, using military might and political cunning to extract tribute from weaker neighbors. For decades, the Mexica had served them faithfully, providing warriors and resources in exchange for protection. But the balance of power was shifting, and a moment of opportunity was fast approaching, the death of Tezozomoc and Tepanec civil war. The turning point came in 1426 CE, when Tezozomoc, the long-reigning and formidable ruler of Azcapotzalco, died. Under his leadership, the Tepanec Empire had expanded its dominance across the valley, but with his death, succession disputes tore the Tepanecs apart. His son Maxtla seized power, but his rule was harsh and unpopular. Maxtla distrusted the Mexica, who had grown too powerful for his liking, and he began to plot against them. He imposed new tributes on Tenochtitlan, humiliated its leaders, and eventually orchestrated the assassination of the Mexica Tlatoani Quimalpopoca. This act was the spark. The Mexica, long humiliated, now had cause to break free. But they could not do it alone. Forging the Triple Alliance, in 1428 CE, the Mexica turned to their neighbors for support. They allied with Texcoco, ruled by the exiled Prince Nezahualcoyotl, a brilliant statesman and strategist who had been ousted by the Tepanecs. They also gained the support of Tlacopan, a smaller but strategically important city-state. Together, these three powers formed what would be known as the Triple Alliance, an agreement to wage war against the Tepanecs and share the spoils of conquest. The war that followed was swift and decisive. United under the leadership of Itzcoatl, the new Tlatoani of Tenochtitlan, the Allies crushed the Tepanecs. Azcapotzalco, the once mighty capital, was destroyed, and Maxtla was executed. With their overlords gone, the Mexica were no longer vassals. They were now equals, and soon leaders, within the new alliance. The rise of Tenochtitlan. Although the Triple Alliance was technically a partnership of three city-states, in practice, Tenochtitlan soon dominated. By tradition, spoils of war were divided. Two parts went to Tenochtitlan, one to Texcoco, and one to Tlacopan. Over time, this arrangement enriched the Mexica far more than their allies. Under Itzcoatl, the Mexica began a systematic transformation of their society. He ordered the burning of old codices, historical records that might undermine the Mexica's claims of legitimacy, and commissioned new histories that glorified the Mexica as the chosen people of the gods. This rewriting of history gave the Aztec state not only power but also a sense of destiny. Itzcoatl also expanded Tenochtitlan itself. The great temple, or Templo Maya, began to rise at the heart of the city, dedicated to Huitzilopochtli and Tlaloc, the rain god. Around it, plazas, palaces, and marketplaces flourished. The Mexica were no longer just mercenaries or tributaries. They were rulers with a vision, conquest and tribute. The Triple Alliance now turned outward, launching campaigns of conquest across the valley. Neighboring city-states were defeated, forced to pay tribute in the form of maize, beans, textiles, cacao, obsidian, and labor. Over time, the tribute system expanded to cover regions far beyond the valley, binding dozens of polities to the Aztec state. The tribute system was not merely economic, it was ideological. Each conquest reinforced the Mexica's belief that they were chosen to rule, destined to sustain the gods through offerings of wealth and blood. War became not just a political necessity, but a religious duty. The first wave of expansion. With the Tepanecs gone, the Triple Alliance began to dominate central Mexico. Cities that resisted were crushed, their people enslaved or sacrificed. Those that submitted were absorbed into the tribute system, enriching the growing empire. By the mid-15th century, Tenochtitlan had become the most powerful city in the Valley of Mexico. Its markets teemed with goods from across Mesoamerica. Its temples soared above the lake, and its warriors carried the Mexica banner into every corner of the region. The outcasts had become conquerors. The prophecy of the eagle and cactus was being fulfilled, not just as a city, but as the heart of an empire.